witness its beauty and majesty, yet am somehow saddened that not one insect on the page can flutter in the sunlight above a blossom. We have, in effect, robbed each beautiful creature of some of its essential nature by pinning it down. There are times, too, when I want to be a bird watcher, to risk going out in the wild places to catch a glimpse of an exotic beast of the air, to grab a glance, to let God be God. Bird watching, it seems, is like God permitting Moses to see God's backside. My wife and I sometimes walk through Dyke's Marsh along the Potomac River just past Alexandria. Occasionally, we'll walk past bird watchers, and kind souls that they are, they will ask whether we would like to see the bird they are viewing. Usually, I'll nod yes, and peer where they point. I'll say, "How lovely," or something like that, but in truth, I can never see what they see. You see, it takes some discipline to catch sight of a small green bird in a canopy of leaves. Which brings me back to the Professor Delio and the Scholar in Residence program. The Reverend Jack McClendon, who gifted the program to the New York Avenue Church, wanted to be sure that he had left a legacy of theological adventure to the congregation he had served and loved for 35 years. When he left much of his library to the church, it was strewn with the works of both butterfly collectors and bird watchers, although probably it leaned toward bird watchers. Tonight, we are pleased to have with us someone who has faithfully sought to tap the special learnings and insights of her background in the sciences to explore perhaps a different side, a different dimension of the God she worships. It seems to me that Professor Delio, her special gifts must include imagination, humility, and courage. For at least in my mind, it can't be all that easy to be a bird watcher. And I hope your attention and discipline will yield a glimpse of a little green bird in the high canopy. Would you please pray with me? Gracious One, you have given us eyes to see, ears to hear, minds to imagine, hearts to feel. Let us bring all our senses, our capacities to witness to your love and to share it with others. Amen. Thank you, and now I'd like to introduce you to Theo Brown, the wonderfully adept Executive Director of the Scholar in Residence program.
Thank you so much, Paul. I really like that metaphor, and we'll remember it. I want to add my welcome, say how glad we are to have you with us tonight. We once again have a large number of people signed up for this program. We have almost 700 people registered to hear this presentation tonight. Those in the room are smiling because they know most of those people are not here. We have a relatively modest group in downtown Washington, and we're delighted that you braved the elements to come, those of you who are here. I saw that the Nationals game just down the road is rain delayed, but we are not rain delayed. We are going on ahead and are glad some of you made it here within the weather. If you're online, we'd love to hear from you about where you are and perhaps if you're with a particular group organization. Some of you are already typing in your names, I'm sure, and all, but we always like to look at it and see where folks are from. So take a moment and type into the chat where you're from, and again, if you're with a particular congregation or institution, glad to know that also. We're delighted to have Dr. Ilia Delio with us this evening, and as you can see, her topic is God, Evolution, and the Power of Love. That is, I think we can say, a very big subject, and I wish we had more than 90 minutes to tackle it. I hope what will happen is that this will be one of those programs that stimulates your thinking and makes you want to learn more. And later in the evening, we will take a moment and share a little bit more about some of Dr. Ilia's work, as well as other resources that you might want to follow up on. And we're just delighted you're with us for this program. After her presentation, we'll have some time for questions. We're going to try to take some questions from online. So if you have a question, you're online, type it into the chat. Someone is monitoring that, and we'll see about asking a few of those questions as much as time allows. Try to make your questions brief. Make it a question if you can. And if you don't have a wording for it, just say, I'd like to hear her talk a little bit more about something that she mentioned. And that's often the best way to just clarify. So we will have some time for that. I have some questions that have been submitted in advance. We look forward to talking with her. Those of you who are here in person also will have the opportunity of talking some with Dr. Delio after the time is over, and you didn't get a question asked or you had a thought. She's graciously agreed to stay a little while and visit, and we also have refreshments remaining for you. I now want to introduce Dr. Delio to you. She is a woman of amazing breadth and intellectual activity. The first thing you have to know about her is that she is a proud native of Newark, New Jersey. And you hear her mention that in her presentations. I'm sure she thinks of that as a good framework for all that she has learned intellectually. She is one of those rare individuals who has a PhD in both science and religion. She has a PhD from the School of Biomedical Ethics or Biomedics, I believe, at Rutgers. And she also has a PhD in theology from Fordham University. She's the author of numerous books. We'll talk some about them more at the end, including several that have won awards, including The Incredible Wholeness of Being. I love that title. And other books that we'll be mentioning and sharing with you a little bit later on. She is currently a professor at Villanova University, has been, I believe, for 10 years. Before that, was here with the Washington Theological Union for a number of years, and also, I believe, taught at Trinity College in Hartford at the beginning of her frame. The other thing about her is that, of course, she is a Franciscan sister, and she brings that perspective with her in terms of all of the work she does. Truly extraordinary scholar and person. We're delighted to have with us tonight Dr. Ilia Delio.
Thank you. Well, it is lovely to be here with you. Just getting my slides together. What a remarkable place New York Presbyterian is. I just was upstairs in the Lincoln Room, pretty awed, actually, by the seat of Abraham Lincoln. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. I have to put my password in here. Hopefully I got it right. Yes. Can you see it? The HDMI connector? There we are. Don't you love technology? So as Theo mentioned, thank you, Theo, thank you, Paul, for those lovely introductions. So I tend to be a big picture person, right? I'm always looking at the big picture. And one of the big pictures is, how did we get here? You know, in a planet in crisis. Maybe it's always been in crisis. Maybe we should talk about that a little bit at some point. But we are in a kind of precipitous moment in terms of where we are. There we are. Let me just make sure we have this here. That's interesting. I have to just make sure that my slides are working synchronously. And they're not. Oh, that's beautiful. It's a world of contingencies that we know. Okay. So this is a world of crisis. planetary crisis, global climate change, crises that we're all familiar with, species depletion, the migration crisis, poor being, in a sense, released from their, I'm sorry, I just want to, there we are, okay. That's what I need to, I'm sorry, I need to get my, my slides together here, and they don't want to get together because I have too many things open. So let me take that out. Let me, that's what happens when you come early to these things. You know, you think you're all together. And maybe this will work better. Yeah. Let me just, yeah, I think that's it. I teach undergrads, so I do this all the time with them. So I hope you're as patient as they are. There we are. Okay, so we realize the conditions that we're living in, and I'm very concerned, as we all should be, about climate change and the disruption of our lives. I'm here right in downtown DC, and racism, white privilege still abound. And so these are the concrete historical circumstances. Now I'm going to leave those for the big picture. What's at the heart of all this? How did we get to a planet that has become so sort of unraveled, so fragmented, that's deteriorating, that we have abandoned the earth? We've just developed a whole mindset that there's a better life somewhere else than here. And therefore, I want to look at how religion has just briefly emerged and maybe talk a little bit about the problem of monotheism and where science is challenging us to reconceive what we mean by the word God and what that God means for us. So, this is just a broad schematic to say religion hasn't always been this way. As we emerged, as a human species, we developed a sense or an awareness of spirit in nature and what we might call pre-axial, or what's known today as indigenous spiritualities, where spirituality was, in a sense, how the tribe or the community was formed, the stories it told, the types of rituals that, in a sense, enabled life to have meaning and purpose. Pre-axial religions still exist today. They haven't gone away, but for the most part, as we shifted consciousness with the development of cities and urbanization and the development of the human person, we came into what's known as axial consciousness. So our religion, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, are monotheistic faiths that emerged in the axial period. This period emerged around 800 to 200 BCE, and it's on its way out. That's basically what I want to tell you. It's the age of religion where we came to conceive God as a power that is beyond us, over us. We came to conceive the human person as an autonomous subject, a thinking subject. But that notion of person and God is shifting in this new age, what we might call today the second axial period. It's a period that was brought about by largely by mass communication, by technology, and by the new science at the beginning of the 20th century. So we know ourselves to be related. Ecology now is more prominent than ever before. We have a sense of immanence. There's something that is calling us here to work for justice, to build community. And we have a global sense of belonging to a planet, thanks to technology. And so we are in a huge shift, and that's one of the things we have to recognize today. Christianity, in a sense, is as a monotheistic faith, and Jan Assmann's book on the price of monotheism is a very important read, because he claims that the development of the one God idea, which he locates in Deuteronomy, the Lord your God is one, and God alone, and therefore this is the true God, and all other gods are false gods. So he feels that monotheism set up sort of a boundary around God as to what was true religion, and everything else was pagan or idolatry. And therefore he locates that kind of monotheism as it spills over into politics, the one ruler, even in Roman Catholicism, the papacy, the one head. But when we think about God, and I don't know what your concept of God is, but Not that, this should be the image, but, this white male figure hovering over us became kind of a prominent figure for many ages. We all thought that God looked something like this, like someone's grandfather, and usually a white Western European grandfather, that who brought everything into being, and governed the earth, right? So we probably may even may still think like this. Now, that's perfectly okay, so don't feel anything I'm telling you, don't feel bad about it at all. Whatever your belief system is, I truly honor and cherish it. I just want to tell you that this image of God has not been all that helpful, quite honestly. Because we, developed this idea that God is this supreme, excellent, all-worshiping, right? So, as Anselm that said, that which no greater can be conceived. So, we say things like, well, God knows, what's going to happen, or God knows what's going to be the outcome here. God can predict the future. God loves us. This kind of super essential being. And this kind of God, was immutable. It's like no matter what happens in the world, well, God is just untouched by it, right? So this God is self-sufficient, the unmoved mover, to use Aristotle's term. So Thomas Aquinas would say, well, this God creates the world. So God is really related to the world, but we just participate in this God. So we don't really have any real relationship with God, which means our lives don't make a significant difference to God. Like, God hopes that we'll do good, and our thing is always, we're going to do good so we can go to heaven of some sort, and God's like, that's cool, do your best. And we say, do your best, and God will do the rest, And we have this idea, that this God who is all perfect being gives rise to being, and we're here on a journey. And our task is to return to God. So we come from God, we're going to return to God, which is very much how the medievalists thought about this, which is very attuned, by the way, to the medieval cosmos, which was circular and static and, hierarchical. This kind of theology also was very governed by Greek thinking. Now, Greek philosophers were great observers of the cosmos, but developed ideas that there's something there, like Plato, there's something that's there that's more perfect. The perfection of things is not here. Here is just sort of like an imitation of things. Like you and I are just imperfect copies of the real. And so the idea is to get to the real, which means you have to leave the world behind and you have to make this ascent. This gave rise to ideas like the spirit is where God dwells. The only really important thing really belongs to the spiritual life, which is the soul's true home. And so these ladies asked me before about, my original sojourn into religious life was into a monastery where you fled the world, the fuga mundi, and then you devoted your life to God. And so after 4 years, I was wondering how the world was doing, so I left. It also, this kind of thinking where spirit was more important than matter meant that, well, matter's mutable, right? Matter changes, matter dies. The bodily existence, it suffers. Evil is real, it affects us bodily and spiritually. Matter meant there's no place of lasting concern here. In terms of science, science was like, well, matter is just, stuff. So we're going to understand the stuff. But it had no real meaning. And we're still a little bit, I'm not sure where we are in that thinking. Matter has no real essential meaning. Like matter's nice because we have bodies, we have chairs to sit on, we have floors, but the real stuff is, spirit. We have to tend to our spiritual life. And this kind of gave rise to kind of a timelessness. God is sort of timeless, outside time. And, even when you ask people, think about death, people are like, oh, eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord. And I'm like, well, what do you plan on? Is just an eternal sleeping? What are we anticipating for eternal life? God is absolute, and God is unaffected by anything. Perfect being, eternal being, all-knowing being, all-powerful being. And that's the question of God we want to ask this evening. Is God timeless, absolute, eternal, perfect, and all-knowing? So are you ready? Okay, good. Alfred North Whitehead, who really is the founder of process theology, a mathematician by training, a philosopher, taught at Harvard, in 1925 wrote a really famous article on science and religion and said, "Religion will not regain its old power until it can face change in the same spirit as does science." In other words, if science undergoes paradigm shifts, like we have computers and light bulbs today, religion has to do the same thing. He says the principles of religion may be eternal, but the expression of those principles requires continual development. That's the part that we've been a little bit slow on. We're pretty sure religion doesn't need some updating. But the fact is, because we have been reluctant to update religion to religion 2.0, we've been really, I think, out of alignment with the world in which we now understand this universe. So one is we need a new story that aligns with our knowledge of the universe. We are mythic people. We're storytellers. As Paul was showing me the stained glass windows upstairs, they tell a story of creation, salvation, redemption, etc. We need a new understanding of matter and spirit that's aligned with modern physics. We need a new understanding of the human person. Our anthropology is just, I'm not sure where it is, but it's a little bit out of date from a religious perspective. We need a new understanding of God as a God of evolution and indeterminacy, a God who may not know everything. And therefore, we need to read the scriptures with new eyes through the way we now understand our cosmic story. So here are three windows of understanding the new science. The large, the Big Bang story. This will be very brief, don't worry, don't get too nervous. The small, and the complex. So first, the large. Well, up until 1905 or so, we thought this universe was static. We thought it was just put in place. From a religious perspective, God ordained things, right? God created out of nothing, set the world in order, and, keeps it spinning. But in 1905, Albert Einstein, who had a kind of boring job, he was like working in a Swiss patent office, and he was just like thinking one day, what would it be like to ride a beam of light at the speed of light? I'm sure you've had that question yourself, being bored. And he began to wonder about Newton's laws of space and time. And he said, they don't seem right, And so as he was working things out mathematically, he realized there's no such thing as absolute space or absolute time. And all our religious language up until the 20th century has been based on absolute space and absolute time. In fact, time is getting to be really weird, I have to tell you. I don't know if you're keeping up with the current theories on time, but it's really a fascinating phenomenon of cosmic life. So space-time is not flat, but it's sort of curved. We don't live in sort of a block, well, that's a quantum question. We don't live in a Legos universe. We live more like in a bazooka bubblegum universe. It starts out as a wad, and then you start to blow a bubble. And it's something like that. It began about 13.8 billion years ago. That's a very, very long time. So if you're feeling old this evening, think of the universe. 13.8, it's just a rough estimate. I've seen now 26 billion years ago. Scientists are always working this stuff out. So I leave it to science to really judge the estimate of the age of this universe. How it began? That's science. We don't know. Was it out of a collapsed universe, a black hole? Is it one of many universes? Are we a brain, like a membraned universe that's working in tandem with another universe? All we know is we can talk about this universe that began as a hot, dense something, and within the first 3 minutes, it started cooling rapidly, and the forces of the universe that allow you and me to sit in chairs and not fly out and, and listen and pay attention, these forces were set in place. And over time, the universe has been unfolding space and matter. We call it space-time mattering. It's like a piece of paper rolled up, and it's starting to unfold, and it's driven by energy. And so it's an expanding universe. And we don't know how far will it expand. Billions of years, indefinitely? Will it eventually, converge, collapse, which would mean time would run backwards? Again, that's science. What we do know is that we're expanding with it sometimes, and therefore we know we're deeply part of the universe. What's even more is that Albert Einstein began to ruminate that matter was a form of energy. Now this is a really important part, because how we understand the stuff of life really makes a fundamental difference to life itself. What is matter? That's the big question here. What is matter? And Al, I call him Al because I talk about him so much, he said, well, matter is mass times the speed of light squared. So, if I take this block of wood here, on this podium, I take a little block, it's got a particular mass. Now, if I light a fire to it and it goes up in ashes, it's going to have a different type of matter. I'm going to call it like ash, but it's going to be the same matter. It's just the same mass, just different form. So mass and energy are interconvertible, but that mass can take on different forms in what we call matter. So matter is the form of energy, basically what we're saying here. And matter is energy packed into form. So basically, we're all energy. We're all little packets of energy, all tied up into form that we call body and et cetera. So if you drill down to the bottom of matter, like matter, what is matter? It just goes all the way down to this field of just possibilities. Like if we're energy, the stuff of that energy is just random possibilities or just fields of electrons or standing waveforms. So I take matter to look something like this, right? Which kind of is counterintuitive. It's the very last thing you would think matter looks like, which is a bunch of relationships or mathematical formulas. Because matter is, it's more mysterious. It's not weird, it's mysterious. And one thing that I think the new physics is inviting all of us, including scientists, to is the awakening of mystery, right? It's the ineffable. We can't say for exactly what something is. Now, quantum physics is that science of physics that in the early 20th century we began to realize that what we call particles exist in a kind of dual state. When particles can exist as waves or particle itself. So it has what we call a dual nature. And that means everything that matter is always kind of in this superimposed state. Is it wave or particle? It's weird, right? It's possibly one or the other, but we don't know until we make an observation. So that's where the mind, or the role of consciousness, now has become important for the determination of what something is. Is it a wave or a particle? I don't know. I have to make a measurement. So you have to hold that notion of quantum physics in the background here. The other thing is, Al and his two students, his students said, look, Al, I think this kind of quantum field of energy, the stuff of energy, is all interrelated. Like everything's affecting everything else. Al, if you take two particles whose spins cancel each other out, and then you split them apart, and then you put one particle here on this podium at New York Presbyterian, and you put the other particle on the moon, if I turn this particle up 180 degrees, the particle on the moon will turn down 180 degrees. And you go, what? That is, Albert did not like this idea, by the way. Albert had a hard time with this stuff. And he's like, nah, I don't believe that. And of course, it was later shown to be true by the physicist John Bell. We call this non-local action at a distance, or spooky action at a distance, which means that nothing about us is private. Anytime we've interacted, every action of ours is having some effect somewhere else with whomever we have interacted with. In fact, the physicist Henry Stapp says that even occurs to how we think, consciousness. For example, years ago, we would say, I had a good friend named Pat, and we worked together closely, and then Pat left, she retired and moved to Boston, and one day she called, I was thinking of her, I wonder how Pat is doing, and she called within a half an hour, and we used to say, what a coincidence, I was just thinking about you. Now, we know we're entangled, so the thought in my mind appeared in Pat's mind. And you go, no. And I'm like, yeah. So Paul Dirac, in a 1933 talk he gave, as he was receiving the Nobel Prize, says, we are so deeply entangled, connected, that if you pick a flower on Earth, you move the farthest star. It's metaphorical, but it gets the idea. Our actions are not just separate and individual actions. So what we are realizing is that nature is composed of deeply entangled fields of energy, so that the nature of the universe itself is undivided wholeness. This is our nature from which we emerge, undivided wholeness. David Bohm, the physicist, says, as human beings and societies, we seem separate, but we are part of an indivisible whole and share in the same cosmic process. This is our deepest reality. Now, Max Planck, another genius physicist at the beginning of the 20th century, said, look, consciousness, for the longest time we thought consciousness was just something we humans had. Like, we're special, we have consciousness, and that's what makes us human. We can make decisions, etc. And Max said, no, given what we now know from quantum physics, he says, I regard consciousness as fundamental. And I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything we talk about or we regard as existing begins with consciousness. So according to Max, it's not matter, mind, it's mind, matter. Which, has led some people to speculate maybe consciousness is right at the beginning of the universe. More and more people are beginning to see it sort of as a fundamental field or a fundamental aspect of cosmic life. It's much more closely related in this way to like gravity or, a fundamental force field. So here's what Henry said. I knew I had him somewhere. He says, our human thoughts are linked to nature by non-local connections. What a person chooses to do in one region seems immediately to affect what is true elsewhere in the universe. In other words, our thoughts do something. Our thoughts affect matter. So this in itself would be worth reflecting on. How we're thinking, what we're thinking about, and the way what we're thinking about is actually affecting the world in which we're living. If we have a crisis, therefore, we have to begin to ask ourselves, where are we in this crisis? Now, just one more brief note here on the science part, and that's on the field of evolution. So evolution is one of those words, we get a little nervous about. We're not sure what to do with it. Darwin didn't invent this word. It was around way before him. But it simply means he was looking for change and variation, in species. On a more broad scale, it just means life is dynamic. It's not static. Life is changing. It's not fixed. And it's a process. It's all about relationships, right? So we're always in this movement. Life is about a movement, a flow into something more. And, if you look at our story, which we could put into this encyclopedia of 30 volumes, and we were to ask, well, where are we in this story of life? Well, think of each volume having 450 pages, and each page 1,000,000 years. That's a long time. Okay, volume 1 is the Big Bang, and then 20 volumes later is the Earth. So there's a lot going on there in cosmic life, way before, little planet Earth comes along. Volume 22, little paramecium on Earth. It really began a little sulfur pool in somewhere in Perth, Australia. And then the Cambrian period, volume 29. And then volume 30. By the way, that's our volume 30. The dinosaurs appear and then they go extinct on page 385. Mammals appear on 390, like elephants and whales and things like that. And then page 450, the last line, and the last two words are human beings. That would be us. Now, there's no period. There's no, thank you for reading this book. There's no, afterward, reviews on Amazon.com. We are now in evolution. We are the last word now in evolution, and we're writing ourselves into a new dimension. And so, that's what we realize from evolution. One of the greatest drivers of evolution, there are three drivers of evolution beyond Darwin's natural selection ideas. One today is talked about a lot, and that's complexity. And that means that, things wear down, we know entropy increases, but there's something about life that is always oriented toward more life. That's really amazing. Things wear down, but everything doesn't really die out. It kind of regroups and then forms something on a new level, like a higher level. So, we move from single-cell life to multicellular life to plant life, animal life, to human life, and even today, we're still complexifying with artificial intelligence. So we are in evolution with AI into something new, which means nature is incomplete. And here's the good news. There are no fixed essences. No fixed essences. People are you sure about that? Are you positive? I'm like, yeah, pretty much. Look at the long span of time. You'll see. Life does change. Life is consistently oriented toward new and complex life. And the greatest drivers of life, creativity and transcendence. There's a novelty built into nature. And that's a really interesting question. So if God is this static, immobile, immortal being, how do we make sense of the incompleteness of life toward new life? So this is, one of the sketches I use of evolution, because in the Catholic Church, we're basically on the bottom. Women are still, still working our way up there. But in terms of technology, again, please do not take these scientific aspects of evolution, but technology it's evolving us so fast, we can no longer keep up with it. In other words, it's outpaced our human brain. But I do remember when the first cell phone was formed, in the late 70s, off the wall in New Jersey, and then you could carry it around. And in the 80s, they said they're going to put a computer in a phone. And I said, well, what's a computer? I have no idea what you're talking about. So, all of this stuff is from 1998, the last basically 30 years. We have moved from sort of a steady progression of evolution to an exponential evolution. And in 10, 15 years, all this technology is going to be outdated. In fact, it'll be obsolete. We'll have implantable software. We'll be communicating in ways that we can't even imagine at this point. So, all of this to say is that Teilhard de Chardin, my guide to all things in the universe, a French Jesuit priest, a scientist, a paleontologist, and one who really had a deep love for Christ, and yet was very committed to science and really tried to bring Christianity and evolution together. And one time he said, well, evolution's so much more than just about science. It really affects everything. All theories, all systems, all hypotheses must, in a sense, accept evolution if they are to be thinkable and true. All systems. So one thing is, we have outdated systems. We have systems based on principles from another time, another cosmos, another generation. Teilhard had basically 4 principles that are just, worth just to mention here. The universe is still coming into being. The universe is still coming into being. It's not fixed. It's a dynamic process. He didn't talk about creation. He talked about creative union. There's a dynamism of unitive nature at the heart of life. It's constantly it's a constant coming into union. And as things come into union, they differentiate. As they unite, they become more themselves, because it's this kind of forming of self that becomes the basis of union. And finally, and this is probably to me the best news of all, the world rests on the future as its sole support. Future is not just what's linear, like there's a tomorrow, this blank tomorrow. Future is the realm of infinite possibilities from a quantum perspective. In other words, the future is the indeterminate that's already in the now. So just to keep those things in mind. So Teilhard is very attuned to the new science of his day, very attuned to quantum physics and evolution. And he said there's something driving this process. There's something here. There's an energy here. Energy keeps wearing down, and yet life keeps building up, which is really interesting. So he spoke of a withinness and withoutness. All matter has a withinness and a withoutness. All matter, he said, has an element of consciousness or mind and an element of matter or attraction, which means every quark, every lepton, every cell, this computer, this desk. In Teilhard's idea, in panpsychism, there is some kind of informational awareness. And that just is no, that's not possible. That's the opposite. No. Well, you're not a desk, so you really can't say, right? So, but yes, according to this paradigm, we call it panpsychism. And he says all energy is being attracted, and as things attract, they're moving beyond, right? So there's attraction, tangential energy, and transcendence, the beyond. And therefore, he says, well, what can best describe this kind of unitive energy that has awareness, that has attractability, that has creative union, that has transcendence? Love. So he speaks about love as the most universal, the most tremendous, the most mysterious of all cosmic forces. Love. Not just an emotional love or human love, but love as a cosmological force. Love as the core energy of the universe. An energy of attraction, an energy that's unitive, an energy moving beyond. So he says the force of love energy is present from the Big Bang onward, though indistinguishable from molecular forces. So he sees love already present, this love energy at the most basic levels of cosmic life. And he says, driven by the forces of love, the fragments of the world are seeking each other so that the world may come into being. The fragments of the world are seeking each other. There's something here that's irresistible, deeply attractive, and unitive. And therefore, this cosmic story, this new universe story, invites us to reconsider the conditions for God. And one would be temporality, time. Something is coming into being, right? Matter is forming. Energy is uniting. So temporality would be one. Contingency. Everything depends on everything else. There's an interconnectedness, an interdependence of events. And as things are forming, they are, in a sense, actualizing possibilities, and therefore they're constantly looking toward the future, right? And therefore, what he says we can kind of now put aside is the idea of eternal, timeless, sameness. And those conditions no longer meet, in a sense, or fit the universe that we find ourselves in. And that led him to ask, who will give evolution its own God? So many people just want to import the old God from, the one we grew up with, whether that's the 12th or the 16th or the 18th century. They want to import that God into the 21st century. And Teilhard's like, well, we can't quite do that because that God no longer fits our world. And it is, in a sense, why a lot of young people are like, very nice, but I'm not here anymore. It doesn't work for me. So as Teilhard says, God has become too small to nourish in us the desire to go on living and to live on a higher plane. He says, science now tells us we live in a cosmogenesis, which means we have to change how we're thinking about things, including our beliefs. And I think we're pretty good about changing how we think about things in terms of science. But when it comes to beliefs, we're like, no, we're not doing that. We don't want to upset God or something. And I'm like, God will be completely happy with that, believe me. And so panpsychism. This is, sometimes we talk today about a living universe. It really is, or the Gaia hypothesis. I think the one kind of obstacle to life on the planet being more unified is the human person, quite honestly. We get in the way of things because we have higher brains. We make all these big rational decisions, and we're really kind of fragmentizing things. So, we also have sort of a God problem at the heart of it all. We're pretty sure that one God up there, is the real deal, and we got to just make everything fit, to the old religion we know. So one way to begin to look at this is when we use this language of God, the word God, what do we mean? That's the big question. What does this word God mean? So I looked to Paul Tillich a little bit, fabulous theologian of the 20th century, who says, there is a depth dimension that overflows with meaning, the excess of all phenomenon. The name of this infinite and inexhaustible depth is God. God is the power of life itself, the ground of that power. That goes right back to Exodus 4:1-3. Like Moses says, well, who should I tell them? You are. He says, well, I am. That's the name of God, I am. We call that being, we call that reality, however you want to describe it. But what this means is that God is shorthand for the unconditional, right? God is unconditional. God is, in a sense, the ground of all that is, and yet all that is in this dynamic state of becoming. And so therefore, God, we might say, is the possibility of the impossible. God is, all that can be realized. The most moved mover. I mean, God is in this situation, and by the way, in the Bible, God is always in relationship with us, right? That's the whole point of Scripture. A God who's in deep relationship with us, always moved by us, by the way. And therefore, we can say God is the realm of ultimate concern, the dynamism of love. Love needs to be loved, right? Love is not an abstract concept. It's a relationship, a unitive relationship, in which God is the power of life to become more life. So I think the new science helps us to recover the biblical God in some ways, where revelation is not something that fell from above in some kind of sacred, holy way, but emerges from now within this process. Life is awesome. It's wondrous. It's filled with beauty, despite the evil and the violence and the sorrow. Yes, these are real, but they don't put beauty to rest. They don't, quench the good that still lives on. God is the creative energy of love at all levels of matter in life. So God is not stable and unchanging, but God is working through the rhythms of life in deep relationship with us. And therefore, God seeks always to become God in evolution. God is the possibility of life, but that possibility must become actualized. So if the future is resting on its sole support, that means that the question of God is not yet fully answered. So here's some questions to consider. What if God and time are emerging together? That what is taking place in time is not only the building up of the universe, but it is the building up of a capacity for love that shines out in unity and goodness and beauty, which is God. What if God is this depth dimension of this physical world? Even better, what if God does not yet fully exist? That's very challenging for us. But that is inviting us to become part of the God project, of God's life. And therefore, and to me, this is what the Christ is about, by the way. What if the universe is waking up to something more than itself, more than science alone, more than science can handle? That's where Teilhard begins to posit something here, a presence, he says, a presence of energy that is love. He calls it omega, kind of the whole of the whole, something that's centrating everything despite the massive forces of evolution. So he says science cannot prove the existence of omega. What we need is faith in the existence of an organized whole seeking greater wholeness in which we can come to know it and reflect on it. So this omega principle is something that is supporting us from within and something that is, in a sense, acting as a lure up ahead. It's the same reason, like, why do we involve ourselves in social justice? Why are we concerned for the sake of the community? I mean, what is the reason for that? If you're living some comfortable life and somewhere in suburbia, why do we believe these things? Well, yes, it's the New Testament. We're called to love our neighbor, but even that is grounded in something more. Like God is calling us into, even with Jesus, there's being a call into something more, which is what omega really symbolizes. So we're moving towards something, and therefore Teilhard says omega is associated with the energy of love and accounts for the more in the cell, more in society, the more in everything that exists. It emerges from the field of consciousness and the totality of evolution. That's the goal, the moreness of life. And that's what omega is. It's the moreness of being conscious, related, and united in love. And all of life seeks that. So this is what led Teilhard. Now, Teilhard was a Jesuit priest trained in scholastic theology. As he began to reflect on matter and the way matter was continuously giving way to higher forms of complex matter, he began to question, who is this God? So he says, there gradually grew in me as a presence, much more than an abstract notion. He really asked us, get rid of our abstract ideas about God. The consciousness of a deep-running, ontological, total current, which embraced the whole universe in which I moved. And this consciousness continued to grow until it filled the whole horizon of my inner being. And he says, this presence became symbolized by omega as a new and vital presence of God. Not a God draping the world with power, but a God integral to the world's becoming. That is the God of Teilhard in a new age of consciousness. So he says, this stuff, he was a rock digger. He was a paleontologist. Literally, his day job was in the fields digging for old bones. And that's where he writes this. He says, this stuff began to emerge in the direction of a fundamental basis of everything. Here's the key point. So that matter became the place of the absolute. Matter as the place of the absolute. If we had taken Teilhard seriously 100 years ago, I wonder if we would have had an ecological crisis today. But we didn't, so here we're going to keep going. So matter is God-filled. Matter matters. Every rock, every leaf, every tree, every single person, every animal, everything, every molecule of water is filled with God. Everything has an ineffable depth of life. And therefore, conscious material life continuously searches for more life and being because God, divinity, seeks completion in intelligent life. In other words, unlike the old paradigm, we make a big difference to God. We either help build up God's life in the universe or we destroy it. So God and matter are entangled in a whole. And this is what Teilhard writes, as a direct consequence of the unitive process by which God is revealed to us, God in some way transforms God's self as he incorporates us. Not only are we changed in God, but God is changed by us. God becoming more God precisely through, you might say, our actions, our responses. So in his view, we call this an open theism or an open and relational theology. The universe contributes something that's vitally necessary to God, and that is it contributes to God materiality. God needs, in a sense, to express God's self in some particular way. Otherwise, we just have some idea. And there's nothing worse than a bunch of abstract ideas about God, which is actually where the pit into which we fell. He says, evolution is not only the universe coming to be, it is God who's coming to be. God is coming to be. So I call this a God world entanglement. We affect God, God affects us. We're in this entangled relationship together, and we're becoming something more together than we are individually. In a sense, the evolution of consciousness is waking up to this presence of God within and without through this attraction of love, love as this unitive creative energy. So that we can say God and world form a complementary whole. And you can't have just one part of that whole and think you have a whole. You can't throw God out of the picture and just have some kind of partial whole. The whole is in evolution, and it's everything. So in Teilhard's view, God and the world are in the process of becoming something more together than as individual ideas. Because we're grounded in love, and love is the core unitive energy of the universe. So he says the evolution of God and the evolution of humanity, and I would say all of cosmic life, cannot be separated. So he was leaning, by the way, just so it's not clear, to Christian pantheism. And I always say a little pantheism can go a long way. We become so acosmic, so, keeping God out of matter, it's really led to an unhealthy planet. So we live in this entangled universe of inseparability, where we're related to one another, to the things of the earth, and God is woven through everything. So he says, I see in the world a mysterious product of completion and fulfillment for the absolute being himself. God, in Teilhard's view, is completed in and through physical evolution. And it looks, in my view, it kind of looks something like this. This power of love emerging from within, beginning to entangle itself with all emerging life. Just a word on Jesus, but I'm looking at the time, so I just want to make sure that we're okay. Because we should put Jesus in the mix, because he's kind of a central figure of the whole thing. So, as we find this love, this power of God, divine love, emerging up, we can look at the stories from the Old Testament to the New Testament. I mean, we begin to, in the Old Testament, we begin to see a living God, a God of compassion, a God of hesed, a God who gets really, PO'd when things don't go his way, her way, But there's a God who is deeply faithful and unconditional love. I am with you always, until the end of time. And that God rises into the consciousness of Jesus of Nazareth, who was Jewish, right? Just in case we're not sure, right? Born Jewish, lived Jewish, and died Jewish, okay? So never became Christian. His mother wasn't Catholic or anything like that. Always a faithful Jew. But something about Jesus was definitely broke through to a new level of awareness, a new level of consciousness. He's what we might call a trickster, People were expecting something of him, and he's like, I think we'll eat corn today, even though it's a Sabbath, And they're like, how could you deal with that woman? She's a sinner. It's like, okay, if you have any sins, throw the first stone. Always pushing the boundaries, destabilizing them. So some people talk about Jesus as having a mutation of consciousness, which is what Christianity is about. I think once we awaken to the presence of God, we cannot remain the same. That's the whole idea. We're moved into a new level of unitive reality, and therefore you have to you act towards that reality. He's something of a cyborg, that's a modern term, a cybernetic organism, divinity and humanity, hybridized. Okay, don't worry about it. He's a new type of person. I think Jesus, and the figure of Jesus anticipates the new type of person towards which we are called into. That's not just a spiritual person. That means everything about us evolves into a new level of awareness and action. So I just want to say, Carl Jung thought deeply about the New Testament and really did not see Jesus as Savior, but he did see Jesus Christ as symbol of what we're about. And so he kind of symbolizes the self and the reconciled self, the integrated self, from which God then emerges as the core of life. So in his view, individuation, which means dealing with the stuff, right, which we talk about today, which means to really become God, which is what the incarnation, by the way, is. Christianity is, God became flesh that we can become God. We got the God became flesh idea, but we're pretty sure we're not going to be God. And Carl's like, yeah, you do need to get that part straight. Like we have a divine dimension. There's a God depth in each one of us. And we're called to reconcile ourselves with that depth, which means we have to deal with our darkness and our obstacles, which is what this process of individuation is. And that's what I think about Jesus. I think he really, in that desert, in that deep prayer, he really just came to his truest self. And that true self was God. And so, if we don't deal with our own selves, we project a divided heart and a divided soul onto the world, and the world itself becomes divided, which is all that this print is saying here. So consciousness, it's about consciousness drives matter. That's the basic fundamental principle here. Consciousness drives matter, and if consciousness is not fully reconciled within ourselves, if it's not brought into that unconscious darkness in a transformative process of individuating and becoming whole, a partial consciousness remains in darkness, and the world remains in darkness as well. We are always the world in its becoming. We are always worlding the world out of some process of our lives. And therefore, what Carl and Teilhard realized is that God needs us to become whole and complete. The purpose of religion, in a sense, is the process of becoming, to use Merton's language, our true selves. The true self where God really radiates from our lives. And that complementarity of God and self in this entangled wholeness is such that, without this wholeness, this universe cannot really proceed to more wholeness. So we are to become more whole. God becomes more whole in us, and the whole is what we call, it comes under that term, the Christ. So that the whole universe is, in a sense, like one giant person in formation. Imagine the whole universe as one giant person in formation. So through ongoing incarnation, which is what this whole process is for Teilhard. Matter, mind, always making choices in our lives, how we deal with the darknesses, the obstacles, the biases we have within, the places that we refuse to change. All of that needs to be let go. It needs to be surrendered into the flow of life so that we can enter into that deepest level of who we are, where God is. And therefore, I actually don't think that there's some overarching thing called God. I think God is the depth dimension of every aspect of life itself. And therefore, it's when we actually live out of that true dimension of our lives that God begins to rise up and to shine in our world. So we can say in this way, the crucified universe, that universe grounded in love, begins to show itself in love in and through us, not to the exception of the whole, which includes all aspects of nature. But when we are alive in that love, all of nature is also alive in us. So we are God's becoming. That's the whole point of this very long story. We are God's becoming. There is no God who will save us. Absolutely not. That God doesn't exist. We, in a sense, have to wake up to what that word God means in our lives. We have to awaken to the depths of our lives and the power of love in our lives. We have to realize that every single person here has infinite potential, that God can take root in our lives in a particular way, and that is the beauty, by the way, of personhood. Every single person radiates the love of God in a unique and particular way that cannot be duplicated, that cannot be cloned, that you can't download as much as we try. And therefore, I think the livingness of God is in the beauty of love's rich diversity. We're like one giant stained glass window, and every creature, every person is like a little fractal of glass through which the divine light shines. And therefore, Teilhard says, love alone is capable of uniting us in such a way as to complete and fulfill us, for it is love that takes us and joins us by what is deepest in ourselves. As Eddie Hilsum says, each of us moves things along in the direction of war and conflict every time we fail in love. Love is, in a sense, the energy and the litmus test of our lives. So that Teilhard thought, love, core energy, love alone can bring us to the threshold of another universe. Not some abstract love, not kind of some emotional sentimentality, a love that is willing to suffer, a love that is willing to endure, a love that is patient, that is kind, that is truthful, that is forgiving, a love that does justice and peace. And as St. John of the Cross said, in the evening of life, we shall be judged on love alone. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You've given us a lot to think about, to chew on. We have just a little bit of time to talk with you some, sure. And we'll be suggesting ways to learn more and about some of this content, before we close. So much. Where to start? I guess I'd like some general comments about, you said Teilhard's goal is to bring Christianity and evolution into alignment.
Right.
Say a little bit about some ways to do that. Is it a matter of only understanding things differently and talking about things differently, or right. What else what has to happen for that alignment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, several things. One, he thought that the principles of Christianity, which means divinity and materiality, are united. And he thought, that those principles of Christianity fit an evolutionary worldview. In other words, there's materiality, there's matter, and then there's mind. There's something here that's constantly uniting. But what he thought is that he did not accept original sin. He thought that original sin was a straitjacket And so one of the critiques of Teilhard is that people say he tends to minimize evil or suffering. Well, no. He actually saw them as part and parcel of an evolutionary universe. And honestly, I think evil is again, it comes from within. There's nothing out there that says evil, right? So it's that unreconciled self. He also thought that the Christ also needs, so our doctrine of salvation, for example, needs an updating, right? Because we're pretty sure Jesus is going to come again and take the righteous and go someplace. I don't know. But his whole idea is we are the Christ. We are the Christ in evolution. So that Christ is that unitive love of God and human and creaturely life. So and therefore he posits that we're moving towards something, just as Scripture promises a new heaven and a new earth. And that, in his view, is what omega, this maximization of love, this maximization of conscious being in love. So it is consonant with the whole Judeo-Christian vision of Scripture. Is there room for other religions? That would be another question. I would say, absolutely. I mean, Teilhard did not think, you could watch the evolution of his own thinking here. He thought church should be the whole planet. So I think we need to rethink that what we're about is omega, or wholeness, and how we get to that wholeness really is religion in an institutional way is that path of prayer or myth or rituals that help us become more whole. So the many paths that lead to wholeness do lead to omega. So basically that's it.
Well, thank you. Yeah. This notion you talked about, particularly at the end, about God needs us, and that we can build up God or tear down God in many ways. And
yes.
I'd like you to say a little bit more about that. Is this tied to the notion, as I understand it, Teilhard says about though evolution gave us birth, we also can reflect on this process.
Right.
And so in that way, it makes us something of a co-creator more?
Yeah, very good. So that's right. So evolution, again, there's mind and matter through evolution, but it comes to this species, who has a higher, more complex level of thinking, which would be us, and we can reflect on this process. We can know the process that has allowed us to know. And therefore, this openness to God, or what we call the capax Dei, means we have the capacity to think about divinity in a way that impels us to begin to act according to how we can think. So thinking and action here are important to him. It does distinguish us in some ways, but it's not about like we're special. It means that we have responsibility for the whole of, for all planetary life, because we can make choices that can destroy that life. Yeah.
It's the co-creating responsibility.
Yes.
Yeah.
So God won't do it without us, and God does need us to really fulfill it.
I really love the way you talk about love as the energy that drives the universe. I find that very hopeful, and I would like for you to say a little bit more about it. This phrase, fragments seeking each other, that this is sort of the nature of reality as we understand it. And is this as good a news as it sounds like?
Sounds to me. Then again, I'm biased a little bit. But, if you think about cosmic life, sometimes these two-dimensional images don't quite get it, because it looks very nice and neat. But the fact is there has been immense cataclysmic events, before Earth is formed. And then Earth itself is formed probably from an asteroid collision from fallen rock, And then this whole span of biological evolution, about 4 billion years of biological life, has gone through massive cataclysmic events, if not extinctions, major extinctions over time. And yet, life keeps moving to more life. It's like a few years ago, I read the story of, if you remember the massive fires in Australia. And this one man, his whole yard and all the fields around him were charred black from the fires. And he walked out to one of his favorite trees, and he looked at the tree closely, and he could see a little green bud, trying to shoot through the charred blackness. And that's kind of symbolic of life in the universe. As much as we can destroy everything, there's a power here, and that's what he means by this this power of love, or omega. There's something here that is indestructible. No matter how much we destroy everything, itself is indestructible, and therefore it is the ground for hope.
Mhm. And so in that way, love is certainly an ethical guideline, and we find it in nature, in the cosmos.
Well, I think, yes, nature for sure. I think nature does so much better at it. All of Teilhard's principles are much better lived by nature, because like trees do nothing more than be trees, and flowers do nothing more than be flowers. It's only when you get to us that things get a little.
Well, what are some other ways that this insight about the alignment of evolution with everything relevant to our sort of ethical and spiritual lives? Are there lessons in evolution we can look to that are guides in this way?
Yes, I think so. I think, one is, well, there's several. Several. One is that we belong to a planet of life on the whole, right? So we're connected, deeply connected with everything else. And the second is that while it looks like we're in control of everything, everything is affecting us and we're affecting everything. But evolution also calls us to let go. So it's about structures of relationships. It's all about relationships. And so it's always a discernment of relationships. Are our relationships life-giving, not only for me personally, but for the whole of planetary life? And where do things need to shift in terms of systems of relationships? Finally, I think it really is helpful to know that we are a species in evolution. And this is one thing I find religious people don't get as readily as, say, people in Silicon Valley. Like, technologists, people building, computer life today. They kind of know. I mean, if you follow anything in AI, transhumanism, for example, it's like, this species it's on its way out. Some people have the species out, like we're already cyber sapiens or techno sapiens. And this is where Teilhard actually said, no, we have the capacity to become ultra-human with technology. So we have not brought religion and technology together because we don't have a framework to do that. I mean, his framework allows that. But without it, we don't know ourselves to be in evolution. So all the things that presently divide us and fragment us, we have to think we're trying to solve all the problems of the moment, but sometimes all that problem solving really kind of prevents us from looking at what are we becoming together. That's the big question here. All of us, and, the homeless, the poor, the migrants, whoever it is, all of life, we're becoming something together, which means we have to start thinking in terms of future, not just tomorrow, but the possibilities of new life. And in terms of evolution, I think Teilhard would also invite us to creativity. We're not very creative, and we lack imagination. Like, what do we imagine the planet could look like? Like, if we had to revision it, to build it up in a new, what are we hoping for? I don't know. I've never really seen, even artistically, what is our vision for the planet of tomorrow in terms of religion and persons and ecological life?
One question that someone had sent me in advance, a member of this congregation who was an astronomer, and now I see that Camille from online has also asked this about what would you say, and what would Teilhard say about the possibility of conscious life in other places under the earth? How does this fit into your understanding?
Yeah, he actually wrote about it. Yeah, and I've actually written about it too. I call it the third axial age. So in his view, all that we're talking about here in terms of omega is not limited to terrestrial life. In 1950, he started writing about possibilities of other intelligence in the galaxies, so intergalactic consciousness. So so even in terms of Christianity, I don't see that all just limited here. I think even if we talk about the Christogenesis, or the building up of divine love incarnate, that pertains to all forms of intelligent life in the universe. So I definitely think we're just not it here, and neither did Teilhard. He anticipated that consciousness, that's the beauty of consciousness, it could link with other consciousnesses outside this earth.
Another question from online, Alice Kitchen, picking up on your talk about love and being in the essence of energy in many ways and the power that it is in the attraction. And yet she points out what we're all aware of, all the harmful and terrible things happening on Earth. You referenced it, but just talk a little bit about this between, at one level, love is the essence of the universe, and how does it exist with what we would call evil historically?
Yeah, absolutely, right. So, a lot of Teilhard's writings, he wrote during World War I. Like, he was a stretcher bearer in World War I, in the trenches, literally picking up dead bodies and wounded bodies and putting them on the stretcher to be. So he worked there. He was exiled, literally, and then he was basically told never to return because his writings were too disruptive to his Jesuit confreres in the Catholic Church. So I just want to tell you that he lived through immense periods of suffering. So he knew that very well. He knew evil. He did know, he knew war. He knew the price of war. And here's what I think, and maybe to answer that question, because it's sometimes hard for us to get our heads around, like, how can love be the prime energy when we have so much evil, so much violence, so much decay around us? And it goes back to the fact that there's no evil there that doesn't somehow begin here. All evil and war is born in the human heart somewhere, somehow, at some point. And that's why I brought up Etty Hillesum, because she kind of helps us understand Teilhard, because I think what she lived, he also lived. Which means Etty Hillesum was a Dutch Jew who was sent to a concentration camp at the age of 28 or so. She wasn't a religious person. Etty Hillesum, yeah. She was not a religious person. She was a philosopher, a literary person, someone who was very alive with life. And in that camp, she started writing letters to God. They're really amazing, the letters of Etty Hillesum. And as she was writing letters, you can begin to see something opening up within her, like something was kind of being born within her. And she develops this deep God relationship in her own way. And at one point she says, God, you cannot help us, but we must help you be yourself. And that is what Teilhard was getting at. Mm-hmm. You cannot help us, but we must help you to be yourself. And she lived with an immense joy and saw goodness in the face of tremendous, tremendous darkness, evil, and suffering. And therefore, love doesn't negate the fact that we will die. And it doesn't even solve the problems of evil by any means. But it does shape how we go forth and help build this world up. In other words, there's no violence or war that's the last word here. And that's what we learn, that the last word here of life is life. And that's because it has this irresistible power of love.
Oh, thank you. One final question and final comment from you. So much more we could go at, but I really appreciate your insight on these. A question, Arlene Wilhelm from online asks about prayer and contemplation, their role in all of this. If you would talk about that, but just in general, spiritual practice,
yeah,
and how it relates to the kind of thing you've been sharing in this vision of alignment with
right.
evolution.
Thanks. Yeah. I think, Teilhard himself was a deeply contemplative person. He spent long, long hours in the desert, just the vast silence of the desert. No television, no computer, probably no light either. So one of the things is we're invited to, as we know now very well, slow down and go within. And I think the thing is to be able to sit within oneself, to go into one's own room, as Jesus asked us, go to your room and pray, that inner temple. And here's where I think Teilhard, he never writes about this, but in a sense he points to it, to reclaim the soul, or that place of sacredness within us, that depth where, as Martin Buber would say, it's a thou, I relationship. We're not alone. And I think without that, we need a new depth of mysticism today, a new depth of knowing that we're not just atoms and blood cells and neurons. We're not just like bits and parts that can be downloaded and replanted into machinic life. That there's something deeply ineffable and sacred within us. Teilhard tapped into that. And the more, what we see in Jesus, the more we can enter into that depth of divinity within us, the freer we become to be person, to be truly who we are, and we act from that new level of personhood.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I have just a couple of announcements and a final word, and we'll close here in just a couple of minutes. Thank you again. Wonderful presentation, and so much to think about. This presentation has been recorded, will be available and sent to all of you, everyone watching tonight, everyone who has registered but is not able to tune in tonight will get a copy of that. It'll be posted on YouTube, and I think some of us may want to watch it again, and there's a lot to take in. As we come near the end of the program, I do want to share just a couple of things about how to continue learning and exploring. First of all, just want to call your attention to some of the many books that Ilia has written. Here are 4 of them that are of the best known. There are more than 20. I urge you to spend a little time online learning about them. Just quickly, Care for Creation, a Franciscan Spirituality of the Earth from the year 2010. The Emergent Christ, Exploring the Meaning of Catholic in an Evolutionary Universe, which she published in 2013. Unbearable Wholeness of Being, God, Evolution, and the Power of Love in 2014. And The Hours of the Universe, Reflections on God, Science, and the Human Journey was published in 2021. Again, there are many others. This gives you a flavor of the breadth of her scholarly work. Second, I want to mention to you that there are many excellent videos of Dr. Delio on YouTube. If you just want to see more of her talking, you Google her name, and a lot of presentations will come up, and I urge you to do that. In addition to that, you see information here about the creative work that she does with the Center for Christogenesis. They have a very interesting website. You can get on their mailing list, which I have done, and find it very stimulating to receive updates on what they're doing. Also as another thing to tell you about our work, you can continue learning by looking at our website, which has presentations by many previous scholars, including one by Dr. John Haught, who's a colleague of Dr. Leo. We had him on a wonderful webinar a couple years ago. His recording is up there. If you want to watch that in terms of following up, it would go nicely with much of what you heard here. So I really do urge you to take some time, find a few specific things, continue your learning in some of the ideas that have been shared this evening. Finally, before I make just read a closing benediction, if you will, I want to pose a question for all of us. Just always helpful to reflect. What did you hear tonight that was particularly interesting or helpful for you? Maybe one insight you want to explore more. Maybe a thought you hadn't had. Maybe something you knew you were reminded of. But think about what you have really learned tonight, and you may even want to take a moment, write it down, or pause and say it to yourself. But it's helpful, I think, to seal our learnings by acknowledging sort of what they are. So I now want to again thank you for being here. Dr. Delio will stay for a while and talk and visit here with folks here. Again, you'll be receiving the recording in a few days. And as we close, I want to read as a benediction a quote that from Albert Einstein, which she sometimes uses in her presentations, that I have heard through the years and find just to be so wonderful, and I think it's a fitting close for the presentation here. And it is this from Einstein: a human being is part of the whole, called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. One experiences oneself as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of one's consciousness. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Thank you again for being here. Thank you, Dr. Delio, and good night.